I'm Emily. I'm 32 years old and I never thought the story of my life would unravel the way it did. On the night of my birthday, standing in the middle of the ivory room, a place I once dreamed of dining at my world, fractured in front of everyone I loved or thought I loved, my sister Lauren placed a hand on her small bump, her lips curling into a triumphant smirk as she declared, "We're a family now." And beside her, with his hand on her shoulder as though he were proud of the destruction he was causing, was my husband Mark. The entire restaurant went silent, breath suspended in the air, all eyes on me. My sister expected me to collapse in a storm of tears to confirm the role I had always been assigned, the weak one, the emotional one. Mark's pitying glance was so rehearsed it almost made me laugh. Everyone waited for me to break, but instead I stayed perfectly still. I lifted my glass of Pinot Noir, let the silence stretch until it suffocated them, and smiled. They thought they had written the script, but they had no idea I had already rewritten the ending. 6 weeks before that dinner, I stumbled upon the truth. It was so ordinary, so mundane, the family iPad, a recipe I wanted to look up, and there it was, a subject line that stole the breath from my lungs. Our plan. 2 words. I should have walked away, but my hand trembled as I tapped it open. There in black and white was the betrayal laid bare, their affair, their cruel plotting, and the worst of it all, the decision to announce the pregnancy at my birthday dinner. My humiliation was supposed to be their victory, the dagger that silenced me forever. "She'll be too broken to fight back," Lauren had written. "She never fights back." I remember dropping the iPad, the sharp crack against the tile, echoing the crack inside my chest. I stumbled into the bathroom, pressed my back against the door as though I could shut the world out, and for a moment, just one moment, I let out a silent scream. That was my only weakness, my one collapse. After that, grief transformed into something far colder and sharper. Rage. I called my best friend Jessica. My voice was steady, though my hands shook. "It's happened," I told her. She panicked, begged me to explain, but I only said, "I'm not going to cry. I'm going to burn it all down." And that's exactly what I set out to do. For years, Mark and I had tried for a baby. I wanted it more than anything, and he pretended to want it too. He had gone to a clinic alone, came home that night, and wrapped me in his arms, whispering words that still haunt me. "It's not me, Em. It must be you." He let me carry the unbearable weight of believing I was broken. He let me drown in guilt and shame for over a year. That cruelty, I realized, was worse than the affair. It was calculated, cold. When Jessica reminded me of the clinic's protections, I told her simply, "There has to be a way." And there was. 2 weeks later, a PDF report slid into my inbox. My hands shook so hard I could barely move the cursor, but when I reached the summary at the bottom, my heart went still. Patient exhibits 0 sperm motility. Diagnosis, azoospermia. Sterile. My husband wasn't just a liar, he was a monster. I stared at the word for what felt like an eternity. Sterile. All those tears I'd shed, the nights I thought I was less of a woman, the shame I carried, it had all been a lie he let me believe. The betrayal dug so deep, I wondered what else he had lied about. And then slowly the pieces began to fall into place. The expensive tests he claimed he had paid thousands for, I checked our bank statements. There was no payment to Northwood Clinic, but there was a withdrawal, $20,000 in cash gone. My gut told me the truth was far worse than an affair, so I hired a private investigator. I didn't need proof of cheating. I needed the money trail. When he handed me his findings, I almost couldn't breathe. The withdrawals had been flowing steadily into Lauren's accounts, her rent, her car, her designer bags. And then came the death blow. $200,000 embezzled from Mark's company funneled into a down payment for a house. A house not in Mark's or Lauren's name, but in my mother's. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was a conspiracy. My husband, my sister, my own mother. By the time my birthday dinner came, I was ready. The 2 documents sat folded neatly in my purse, the clinic report and the financial investigation. The tools of my revenge. So when Lauren smirked and announced her pregnancy with Mark's baby, I didn't scream, I didn't collapse. I simply raised my glass and smiled, because I knew something they didn't. This was the night I would set fire to the world they had tried to build on my broken back. Mark's face that night was a portrait I'll never forget. Confusion, suspicion, Then the faintest tremor of fear when I slid the folded paper across the polished table. Everyone leaned in curiosity thick in the air. He picked it up, his voice unsteady. "What's this?" "The truth," I said. My words cut through the silence. "From Northwood Clinic, last year." The color drained from his face before he even read it. He knew. He knew what he'd hidden from me, and now every set of eyes in that restaurant would know too. Lauren's triumphant smirk faltered. She glanced at Mark, then at me, then down at her stomach as the realization clawed its way into her mind. "The biggest lie wasn't you sleeping with my sister, Mark," I continued, my voice like ice. "It was you ever pretending you could be a father." A gasp rippled across the room, an audible wave of shock. Lauren's face collapsed into horror, her eyes darting wildly between me and Mark, searching desperately for some explanation, some denial. Mark stammered, You can't." But his voice cracked, and that was all it took for the truth to bleed into the air like spilled wine. I didn't let him finish. My gaze shifted to my mother, who sat frozen, mouth open, hands gripping her napkin so tightly her knuckles were white. "And Mom," I said softly, dangerously, "that house is lovely. But when Mark's company uncovers the missing $200,000, I think they'll want it back." Her face crumpled, and then the room exploded. Mark lunged across the table, rage and panic twisting his features into something almost inhuman. "You witch!" he screamed. His hands reached for me, but before he could touch me, two burly security guards grabbed him, dragging him back as he kicked and cursed. The perfect end to my marriage, a public implosion, witnessed by the very people who had believed his lies. Lauren sat in shock, tears streaking her face, her body trembling as though the weight of the truth was physically crushing her. My mother began to sob, the sound thin and broken like glass shattering in the distance. I stood calmly, my wine glass still in my hand, my purse slung over my shoulder. Jessica appeared beside me, her hand firm on my back, anchoring me with her quiet strength. I turned to leave. That's when Lauren grabbed my arm. Her grip was desperate, her voice trembling. "Emily, please," she whispered. I looked down at her hand, then into her eyes, wide with terror. For a brief moment I saw my little sister, the girl I used to protect, the girl I once loved beyond measure. But that girl was gone, replaced by someone who had plotted my destruction. I pulled my arm free. My words weren't angry, they were final. "I'd save your, please, Lauren, and I'd call Ryan. He deserves to know he's going to be a dad." Her mouth fell open, confusion flickering across her face. And then it hit her. The father of her baby wasn't the man she had betrayed me with. It was someone else entirely, someone she now had to face with her truth. I turned and walked away, Jessica beside me. The heavy oak door shut behind us, sealing off the chaos, the shouts, the tears. For the first time in months, I could breathe. The next 6 months were a blur, lawyers' paperwork, endless meetings, but it was a clean burn. My marriage disintegrated in the same fire they had tried to trap me in, and I emerged from the ashes. I wasn't the broken woman they had counted on. I was something else entirely. I moved into a small apartment in a quieter part of the city. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. I found a pottery studio down the street, and for the first time in years, my hands shaped something new, something fragile that could be rebuilt. Jessica was there too, laughing as she failed to center her clay on the wheel. "So the divorce is final, she asked one day, flicking a bit of clay at me. "As of Tuesday," I said, smiling. His company settled, handsomely. It turned out they preferred to pay me rather than have their fraud exposed in a very public court case. For once, the balance of power shifted in my favor. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed into the studio, my phone buzzed. A news alert. Former finance executive Mark Peterson sentenced to 5 years for embezzlement. A grainy photo showed him in handcuffs, his face pale and hard. I stared at it for a long time and felt nothing. No triumph, no joy, just quiet. He was a chapter in a book I had already finished. I set the phone down, turned back to my pottery wheel, and pressed my hands into the clay. I wasn't broken. I was reshaping myself piece by piece. On the balcony of my new apartment, I kept a single orchid. It had been nearly dead when I rescued it from the clearance rack at a garden store, its petals gone, its stem weak. But I saw life in it. I tended it every day, patiently waiting. And one morning, there it was, a small bud, stubborn and alive, proof that growth could happen even after devastation. For a long time, I thought I was the broken one, the one who couldn't grow. But I wasn't broken. I had simply been planted in the wrong garden. The days after the courtroom sentencing felt strangely empty. I had expected a flood of emotions, vindication, relief, maybe even joy. But instead, what settled over me was silence. Not the suffocating silence I'd known in my marriage, where words were withheld like weapons, but a softer, gentler quiet. The kind that comes after a storm when the air is still heavy with rain, but the sky begins to clear. It was in that silence that I began to truly hear myself again. I remember sitting at my pottery wheel one evening, the clay cool and damp beneath my fingers, Jessica humming softly in the background. My hands moved instinctively, shaping something fragile but whole, and for the first time in years, I felt present in my own body. Not a wife trying to please, not a sister trying to compete, not a daughter desperate for approval. Just me, Emily. But healing was not a straight path. Nights were hardest. Sometimes I would wake drenched in sweat, the echo of Lauren's smirk burned into my dreams. Mark's voice whispering, "It must be you," like a curse I couldn't shake. I would stumble to the balcony, clutching the railing, and stare at the orchid. It reminded me that survival was not about erasing scars, but about blooming despite them. I had to confront what hurt most: my mother's betrayal. Mark and Lauren. I could almost understand lust, greed, selfishness. But my mother, she was supposed to protect me. She was supposed to be my safe place. Instead, she signed her name on the title of a house built on stolen money, knowing full well what it meant for me. One afternoon, months after everything had blown apart, she showed up at my apartment. I opened the door to find her standing there, smaller than I remembered, her face lined not just with age but with guilt. She tried to hug me. I stepped back. "Emily, please," she said, her voice cracking. I didn't know how deep it went. I thought it was just help for Lauren. She always needed more, you know that. I didn't know what he had taken. I didn't know he was lying about you." Her words dissolved into tears. I stood there numb. Once I would have rushed to comfort her, to soothe her guilt, but not this time. "You chose her," I said quietly. "You always chose her." She flinched. "You were always stronger, Emily. You didn't need me like she did." The words cut deeper than she realized. That was the wound I had carried since childhood. Mistaken strength for a reason to withhold love. Mistaken silence for resilience. She had thought I would survive without her, so she gave everything to Lauren. And in doing so, she left me starving. I closed the door gently, not slamming it, not shouting. Just closing it. Because sometimes closure isn't a dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it's the simple act of saying no more. Jessica found me afterwards, sitting on the balcony, my hands trembling. "You okay?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I think I will be." We sat there in silence, watching the orchid bud slowly unfurl into a bloom. It wasn't just my family I had to let go of. It was the version of myself I had been while with them, the fixer, the pleaser, the one who absorbed pain in silence. That Emily had served her purpose, but she couldn't carry me into the life I wanted now. Slowly, I built routines. Morning walks by the lake, afternoons in the pottery studio, evenings with books and tea, things Mark once dismissed as boring. I discovered how much I loved the quiet rituals of living, the kind of peace that doesn't need to be earned through someone else's approval. One evening, Jessica and I went to a gallery exhibit downtown. A woman stood beside me, studying a ceramic vase with a crack running down the middle, sealed with gold lacquer. Kintsugi, the artist's note read. The Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold, making the cracks part of the story rather than something to hide. I couldn't stop staring at it. The gold didn't erase the fracture. It honored it. The piece was more beautiful because it had been broken. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized that was me. I wasn't trying to erase the fractures of my life. I was learning to fill them with something brighter, stronger, more precious than what had been there before. And for the first time, the thought of tomorrow didn't feel like a weight pressing down on me. It felt like a door opening. The final chapter of my story wasn't about revenge. That part was already written in bold strokes. The dinner table revelation, the courtroom sentence, the collapse of everything they thought they had built. What came after was quieter, but no less powerful. I had to learn how to live again. There were mornings when I still woke up and expected Mark's side of the bed to be warm. For a split second I would turn, expecting to see him, only to find nothing but an empty pillow. But instead of aching, I began to feel relief. The absence was no longer a void. It was freedom. Lauren tried to contact me, of course. Endless texts, calls, even emails filled with apologies that swung between rage and desperation. I never answered. I didn't need to. Some betrayals are too complete to repair. She had once been the girl I braided hair with, whispered secrets to under the covers, but that bond was gone. And in its place I built boundaries, thick, immovable, necessary. My mother sent letters too. Handwritten, shaky. I read the first one and then tucked it away in a drawer. Forgiveness is a complicated thing. Some days I think I may get there. Other days I wonder if I even need to. What I know for certain is that forgiveness, if it comes, will not be for them. It will be for me. To unshackle myself completely from the weight of their choices. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I held my first pottery piece in my hands, a small bowl, uneven at the edges, imperfect, but entirely mine. I laughed when I saw it, a real laugh, one that rose from somewhere deep inside me that had been locked away for too long. Jessica clapped like I had just won an award. In a way I had. I had created something new with my own hands out of the same earth that had once felt like it was burying me. I kept working with clay, and soon my shelves filled with bowls, cups, little vases. Some cracked, some collapsed on the wheel, but I learned to love the process rather than fear the mistakes. I started to see myself in every creation, fragile, flawed, but capable of being reshaped. And then there was the orchid. The day its first flower finally bloomed, I cried. Not tears of grief, not rage, but something softer. Hope. That fragile bud unfurling was proof that life continues even after devastation. That growth is slow, patient, and worth the wait. Looking back, I see now that I was never the weak one. I was never the fragile one. I was the one who endured in silence until silence became strength. They mistook my steadiness for emptiness, my quietness for weakness. That was their mistake. What they failed to see is that even the quietest person can hold storms inside, and when those storms finally break, they can wash away entire empires of lies. So if you're listening to me now, if you've ever felt like the broken one, the forgotten one, the one who was always left to be strong because others assumed you didn't need help, please hear this: you are not broken. You are not less. Sometimes you are simply planted in the wrong garden, and when you find the right soil, you will bloom. Thank you for staying with me through my story. It took a long time to heal, and I am still a work in progress. But I hope in some way my journey has reminded you that endings can be beginnings too. If this story touched you, it would mean the world to me if you gave it a like, shared it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribed for more stories like this one. And please leave me a comment below. Tell me, have you ever had a moment that felt like an ending, but turned out to be the start of something new? I'd love to read your stories.